moments while more people arrive, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the NAN webinar on Beyond the 1004 Advanced Techniques for today's non-QM appraiser. My name is Chris Seymour. I'm Vice President of Sales here at NAN. I oversee the sales department and lead business development efforts and also our lender relationships. It's no secret that much of NAN's recent growth is due to our lender partnerships in the ever-expanding non-QM marketplace. And as traditional refinances have slowed and agency guidelines tighten, non-QM lenders have re-energized the mortgage market. Our topic today will focus on non-QM appraisals, and there is no better expert to speak on the topic than our own Chief Appraiser, Bill Waltenbach. Bill's a certified residential appraiser with over 35 years of experience, including time in the field. He's definitely done the work out there on the streets, but also on the lender side, most recently serving as Chief Appraiser of Finance of America, a non-QM lender. So before I turn it over to Bill, I did want to let everyone know that I'm going to be moderating today's panel. Well, it's not really a panel, it's a webinar, but I'll be moderating the chat. So if you have a question, we encourage you to ask that question in the chat. Bill will be pausing from time to time, so we'll get to your questions, and then we'll certainly leave time for some Q&A at the end of the session. With that in mind, we'll turn it over to Bill here to lead us off.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for taking a few minutes out of your day to join us on this webinar. It's actually one I've been a little excited about doing, because of my background in non-QM lending at Finance of America Commercial. If you wasn't familiar before, Finance of America kind of got broken up. You had three different divisions, but Finance of America Commercial was the division that worked in the non-QM space, and it was called commercial not because they really did commercial loans, so to speak. They were all residential, primarily 1 to 4 over like 98%. They would do some things up to 15 units up to when I departed. But they're commercial because these are investment type loans, right? Business loans. These are loans that people were, they weren't getting the loans for their residence, they were getting loans for these investments. So we're going to talk about more of that as we get into the webinar. This is today's agenda. We're going to talk about what is non-QM lending, what the core concepts are, the difference between conventional or FHA and the non-QM appraisal. We're going to talk a little bit about the type of borrower, because the borrower is different than a lot of the mortgage work that you maybe focus on. Non-QM products, which is SFR, single family residential. Those are rental loans, typically long-term, also commonly referred to as DSCR. Fix and flip, right, where you purchase and renovate and resell. And then ground up construction. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as GUC. And then there's some specialized valuation techniques. There's a residual valuation technique. A lot of times, if you look at our LOE, you'll see that technique outlined there. And feasibility analysis. And we'll talk a little bit of why, it's important to at least study it from that perspective. Then lender requirements, right? These aren't Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac or FHA loans. You know, we're not following those guides. So what do you got to follow? We'll talk about that. Compliance and quality control. What are some of the best practices for appraisers, and making sure that once you send that report off, you never have to see it again, because that's really our ultimate goal, right? You want to push that button. You want that thing to be gone, and the next thing you see associated with that assignment is your check, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then bring your questions. Don't be shy. I'm not sure that I can answer them all. Certainly do my best, but I can promise that if I can't answer your question, I'll get your contact information, and we'll get back to you on that. So, without further ado, just real quick, and you can put this in the chat, right? We don't really have a survey that we use. I probably ought to. I always want to do surveys whenever I speak, and I should probably figure out how to do that. But just in the chat, let me know. Have you done non-QM work before? Or have you not? Is this kind of your first introduction to it? Feel free to go ahead and add that into chat. We can kind of get a good feel for the audience here. Just hit that little bubble at the top up there that says chat underneath it, and then it'll open up a message box for you to type in your response there. So, what is non-QM lending? So let's start by clearing up a common misconception. Non-QM does not mean subprime or risky or unregulated. It just means non-qualified mortgage, right? It doesn't qualify for sale to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or FHA. These are legitimate loans, right? They're regulated loans, but they just fall outside of those standard guidelines. So when you hear non-QM, don't think, oh, well, this is a problem loan, or, it's some type of borrower that, doesn't qualify or anything like that. It's just non-qualifying, and that it doesn't meet the expectations of the standard mortgage assignment. And as appraisers, we can play a big role in understanding the nuances between these types of assignments, and providing supportable valuations. And so in this growing market, like Chris had already mentioned, it provides us a lot of opportunities. Um, you know, uh, Look, and I'm not advocating for this or anything, right? But I've heard a lot of appraisers say they're not really interested in all the changes that we're going to be seeing occurring here in the next year or two with the new UAD 3.6. I highly encourage you. I mean, I'm not saying don't do that. I highly think that that's in everybody's best interest. But if you like doing this type of report, I'm not sure that the non-QM lenders will be making the transition to the new UAD 3.6 immediately, right? So if you like this type of reporting, and the way we currently do things, you know, they'll be done on those traditional forms, the 1004, the 1025, the 1073, and things of that nature. Um, so just some food for thought. All right. So um, as appraisers, we're all used to the standard mortgage assignments of conventional FHA, those tight guidelines, following those selling guides, following the HUD handbook 4000.1. These are a little bit different. Instead of following those, and I'm not saying that some of the concepts in the selling guide and the handbook, I mean, there's certainly good concepts, right? Good guidelines for doing appraisal, and some of them even follow closely with expectations as an appraiser, right? But you're not necessarily bound to those guidelines. Instead, it's the letter of engagement, right? It's that letter that you get where it says, "Hey, you got to do this, this, and this. Don't do this, and here's everything that we're expecting." And those things can differ, right? Not only differ from the expectations what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac expect or FHA, but even from client to client, right? So you maybe think, oh, I know how to do an on-QM. I've already done one for XYZ lender. But if you get a request from a different lender, they may want things done a little bit differently, right? So it's so important for you to follow that letter of engagement. The scope of work is especially important to understand and know what you're doing, and not just to default to the guidelines, that we're so used to following for standard mortgage assignments. So think of non-QM of less paint by the numbers and more by read the blueprint. And there's a lot of opportunity if you can figure that out. There's a lot of work to be had in that space. I know here at NAN, we definitely are looking for the appraisers that can, you know, understand what this type of assignment is, read the letter of engagement, follow the expectations. Believe it or not, our QC folks, it's not like they're sitting there with the magnifying glass and their red pen and just itching to find something to send the report back to you. Their life is much easier if everything's in line and they can send the report on, right? Not only that, our clients also like it a lot better because we get the report to them sooner, and it has everything that they need on the report. Um, so yeah, following that, it's definitely going to make a difference. And certainly we're going to take note of everybody that's on the call here, since you tuned in and listened to what we had to say. You're going to have a better understanding of what it's all about. So we'll definitely be marking your profile with that as well. So one of the things that we need to do is understand the investor borrower. There's some significant differences. The non-QM space, you know, they're driven by investors. They're not your typical homeowner. Matter of fact, um, you know, most of the non-QM lenders do not allow the borrower to occupy the property, right? So they can't, I mean, if it's a 15 unit, they don't allow them to live in one of the units. If it's 4 units, you don't live in one, right? These are strictly investment type loans, right? Which is why, whenever you're doing the appraisal, if you say owner occupied, you better be able to support that, because that will disqualify that loan, right? So another thing is a lot of them don't lend in rural locations. Why? Again, because if it's from an investment standpoint, there's not as large of a market in those areas. It could be, end up being a longer holding time, or there's not as many renters in that area. So if you're going to indicate, if you get one of these and you're saying that a property is owner occupied or rural, it's really, really important for you to be able to provide support for that. Now, obviously, if it's a purchase, right, and the current occupant is an owner, well, that's fine, right? Because the borrower, that's who they care about. The borrowers, their plan is not to occupy it, but to use the property as an investment space. Uh, Now, here's the other thing. Most of these borrowers, they're very data savvy, right? They've already ran their own comps. They calculated the rents. They analyzed the neighborhood, and they're going to scrutinize your report like a business plan, because they've already gone through all of that, right? So they've already ran the numbers, and they think that this is a viable, feasible, way to make money, either by purchasing, renovating, and selling for entrepreneurial profit, right? Or maybe purchasing, renovating, and renting, or just, purchasing and straight up renting, right? But they've already kind of been through that entire process, right? And so whenever you turn your report in, they already have their comms, they already have their rentals, they already have in their own business plan what they think is going to happen. And you know they usually do it multiple times a year, right? So many people, this is their business. This is what they do. So they're not like a homeowner who buys a house, every, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years or so. They're borrowing on property oftentimes multiple times a year, right? So they're very savvy in understanding the process and everything along those lines. We can go ahead and I know we promised we would take some breaks here every once in a while. Chris, I don't know whether we got any questions or we.
Yeah, just one question from Angel about are the regular appraisal forms used for non-QM loans?
Yes. So again, that's what I was kind of leaning to, with the new UAD 3.6. I mean, we're all going to be transitioning to a brand new way of doing appraisals. You know, they do use the exact same forms. So they use 1004, 1025, 1073, all of those traditional forms. A lot of them won't do anything on a manufactured property. So very little 1004Cs, right? You're not going to see very many of those because a lot of times they don't lend on those types of properties.
Yeah.
Um,
What might be helpful, Bill, is to talk about on the fix and flip loans how the as is value is put onto a 1004 form. What different ways can the appraisers put two different opinions of value onto one report?
yeah, no, so you're getting a little ahead of me, but that's fine. The fix and flip, you know, uh, and ground up construction, right? They're going to ask for both an as is and an as repaired value, right? Now, if ground up construction is very similar to a mortgage assignment where you do new construction assignment, right? But it will say we require an as is value. Now, even how you report the two values can change with the same client based on the product. So you may have one client who say the primary value, and the value that I refer to as the primary value is the one that's located, if we're doing a 1004, at the bottom of page 2, right? Subject to, and then you put your value, right? That's what I refer to as the primary value. You've got to do two values. Most clients, not all of them, most of them, they're going to want that to be the as repaired value, right? If it's new construction, it's going to be the value that's subject to the renovation, right? Um, the as is value, some clients will require that you actually have then another grid, right? And you put as is comps on that grid and you make your adjustments and then you have your value supported there. Some don't require the grid. Now, do you want to provide a grid? You can. Some of them don't require it. Some of them actually ask for a narrative approach. So they'll even say, if you give us a grid, that's fine, but we still want this format for the narration, right? Where you just go through and you list the comps and the adjusted values and your reconciliation, and you're all good. Um, I understand some appraisers are like, well, look, if I'm going to give you a value, I'm going to do a grid, but you're not required to do a grid. I'm like, well, okay, well, you can keep that in your work file, right? So go ahead, grid them out, put them down. Some clients require the grid, some clients don't. Again, that's why it's very, very important to read the letter of engagement. Some of them are going to want you to put the as is value as the primary value and the as repair value as the secondary value. That's a lot less common, but it does happen, right? So all of these things are things that you can certainly do. Most clients do understand, right, that if you put the condition of the property, on your form, it's going to carry through to every single comp. So let's say the as is condition is a C5, right? Or the repaired condition is a C3. They understand that's going to be the whole way through. And when you go to comps on the later portion, your adjustment's going to be based on what it's going to be for that either as is or as repaired, right? So let's say it says C3, but you're doing your as is comps. It could be that, you have down there C5 with no adjustment. You just put a comment for comps 4 through 6, the condition is considered to be C5, right? Other appraisers do different techniques to where they actually change it, and then they will print that page as a PDF, right? And then they'll attach that page so that the software doesn't, so that the condition ratings are actually the same. All of those techniques are certainly acceptable. And the cool thing is if you have any questions or how to do it, you give me a call and we have a quick conversation, and I can give you all kinds of tips on different ways to do it. Again, a lot of times it's right in the letter of engagement. You definitely want to read that. At NAN, we always have a what we call our um, our standard uh, expectations, the SLA and inspection requirements. That document goes with every single appraisal, right? And it goes out with every single one. And then we have a nanified version of the letter of engagement. And why I say nanified is because sometimes our clients will give us a letter of engagement that includes all kinds of information that really isn't relevant to you. And what do you mean how it's not relevant to me? It may be special instructions for us, but it's not a special instruction for you. And so we kind of filter all of that out so that you don't have to weed through all of it whenever you're reading through the expectations. So usually you'll find those two documents. Um, Always for a non-QM lender. If you're doing a conventional or an FHA and there isn't a nanified version of the LOE, well, then the expectation is that you follow your only requirements are those that are expected in the selling guide or the HUD handbook. Okay. We usually try to keep it, the extra stuff that we send you are the extra client overlays, often referred to by some as scope creep or other things like that, right? But these are things that they require. For example, there are a lot of clients, even though Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac does not require a 1004D, they still want you to do a 1004D, right? And whenever NAN contracts with them, we tell them, okay, we'll tell our appraisers you got to give them a 1004D, which is why then it's included in our letter of engagement. Excuse me one second. All right. So great question. We'll keep moving on here. So let's break down some of the different assignments. First up is the fix and flip. And again, that's a short-term loan. Usually these aren't 30-year mortgages or anything else like that. The investor only needs a loan for a short period of time because they're going to purchase it, they're going to do the renovations, and they're going to resell. It could be as short as I think possibly 3 months, clear up to like 18 months or even 24, right? But they're usually a short-term loan. And again, these are, properties where the investor's planning on renovations, and then selling them for an entrepreneurial profit or a gain. Ground up construction, again, I already kind of talked about that. But they're going to want the as is value. Now, a lot of times on the letter of engagement, there'll be different scenarios, right? Is it just vacant land there right now? Is there already a property on the site? And if there is a property on the site, and it's in livable condition, right? They're going to want the as is means as is, right? So they're going to want to know what the value of that property is the way it sets right now, even though they plan on leveling it, right, and removing it to put on um, the new structure. So, or it could be a property that's there, but it's unlivable, right? And again, even though it's unlivable, a lot of issues I've had in the past as an appraiser says, well, it's, you have to make it subject to, you know, run a certain repairs because it won't qualify. But remember, this isn't for Fannie Mae, this isn't for Fannie Mac, right? They need the as is value. So, and then that's where a residual valuation technique can come into play, and we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. And then we already kind of talked about the DSCR or the single family rental loans. This is the ones where the investor is going to be renting the property. And if you get one of these, if you get a non-QM loan and it requires a rent schedule, we have to have a rent schedule. The lender can't make a decision on the property unless they have both the value and the rent schedule. Matter of fact, the rent schedule is almost as important because I want to make sure that the income the property generates can support the loan, right? So I've had appraisers before say, well, there's no rentals, but here's the appraisal. That doesn't cut it, right? The lender can't make a lending decision on that property unless they have both pieces. They need to have the value and they also need to have the the rent schedule. So if you get it and you think that you can't support a the market rent, you need to let us know that before you work on the appraisal, right? You need to call and say, hey, look, there's no rentals here. I can't get you that. That way we can address it with the client up front before we get too far down the road. All right, so I talked about the residual or touched on it here a little bit, and we're going to talk about it now. So it's a valuable tool, and almost every single non-QM lender accepts this technique, right? And a lot of times it's applicable for fix and flip assignments, right? And it helps estimate the as is value when the property is in serious disrepair, mid renovation, or partial construction. All right. And why is it helpful in those situations? Excuse me. I mean, it's kind of hard to find comps that are mid construction, right? I mean, 60% complete, where are you going to find comps that are 60% complete? You know, and here's the thing, right? Those properties are the most interested buyer is typically these investor types, right? This type of borrower, one who's looking to purchase it, make renovations, or finish the construction. Your standard everyday regular borrower looking for a home, they're not looking for a project, right? They want to buy the house, turnkey, walk in, set up the beds, put out the furniture, and start living, right? So whenever you get into these types of loans, it's the investors, right? Those are the people that are most interested in in these properties. And when they need an as is value, it has to be as is, right? Not subject to anything. So how do you do that? Well, you start with the as repaired value, right? And you say, okay, well, what's this property going to be like when everything is done? And so you get your comps, you have your budget, right? So you know what everything they're going to do to the property. You get your comparables to support that as repaired value, right? And you come up with that final when everything is done. And then you need to identify your hard costs. And those are going to be the contractor bids and the scope of work that's included with the assignment. So they're going to be telling you exactly what they're going to do. to the property, right? Is there going to be an addition? Is it just renovation? And they're also going to be indicating how much it's going to cost. They should be including materials, and much like whenever you're doing new construction, right? What is it that you're doing to this property? And a little secret, these lenders, right? Non-QM lenders, whenever they receive the budget, before they ever send that to you, they often send it off to another company who actually does an inspection of that subject, reviews those bids to make sure that they're reasonable to do the work that's expected, right? Because I've heard appraisers say before, hey, how am I supposed to know this is reasonable, or this is enough to do that? Obviously, you're more than welcome to provide your opinion. And matter of fact, it's also encouraged, right? So if you look at it and you're like, hey, there's no way they're going to be able to do everything they're saying they're going to do with this budget, right? They want that feedback, right? But no, they probably already had somebody do that work already before they even shared that with you. So if you're going to do that, make sure you got good, decent support for it, right? So we're going to take those costs that are shared in that, and then you got soft costs, right? And that's holding costs, financing charges, and then the investor's target return. Okay, what are they planning to make on this, on this project? Because again, they're not doing it for charity, right? They're doing this because they want to, that this is how they make a living, right? So it's a very, I mean, that it's a very legitimate part of this whole process, right? Um, and so what you do then is you have your as repair value, and then you've got your budget, and you've got your soft costs, which includes the entrepreneurial profit. You make that adjustment, and then you're going to have a range that you can choose your as is. Now, why is this legitimate? Again, most people who are interested in purchasing this isn't your average borrower who wants to move in. It's other investors, right? And they're so whenever we're talking about the entrepreneurial profit part, that's a legitimate piece of this. And everybody's like, oh, what's that going to be? Well, I mean, you should know that in your market. And if you don't, do some interviews, talk to some investors, ask them what the standard entrepreneurial profit is. Talk to builders. I mean, what do they usually have as their markup, right? Again, they build houses, they don't sell them for what they cost, right? That's how they make a living. So that's a good indicator. And I would say that most of the clients are usually looking between 15 to 20%. That someone would be looking to make on that. Again, do your own research to come up with that number. Chris, I see that there's maybe some additional questions. Is there anything else we need to touch on?
Yeah, just there was a question. Connie Joe asked if we had a sample report available for review on these ARV fix and flip type loans.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Who asked that?
That was Connie Joe.
Connie. Okay. Connie, yes and no, right? I don't know whether we do this Ask Nan series where it's like any good question always starts with it depends, and that's a really good question. So my answer is going to start with it depends. Um, yes and no, because I mean, do we have these but it's not a good gauge, right? Because again, it the expectations can change from client to client, right? So if I shared with you an example for one client, you know, if you would follow that and a different client has other expectations, it wouldn't be very helpful. And again, even depending on the product, even with the same client, the expectations can change, right? A lot of these clients have very very specific photo requirements, which really important to look at that LOE before you go out there, or even take a copy with you when you go to the property, so you make sure you get all those photos. I mean, we've got a client, they want you to stand on the front porch looking across the street and take a photo directly across the street. They want you to do the same thing in the back, right? They want you to stand with your back against the house and taking a photo out across the backyard, right? They want two angles of the kitchen. They want every bedroom photo to also show the closet. And it goes on and on from there. Some of them, very specific, including the mechanicals and all of those things. So the worst part about missing a photo requirement is they usually want you to go back. So now we've got to, I mean, we're going to be extending the turn time, right? You're going to have to go back to the property again. I mean, nobody wants to do that. To just grab another photo, and you have to, and if it's inside, now we've also got to inconvenience the borrower or the point of contact again to make another appointment for you to go back. So it's really, really important to look at that LOE and find out what photo requirements you need, before you do your inspection.
So we got,
So
yeah, yeah, that was good. We got another question on the last slide about how to calculate soft costs, specifically the holding cost. Like, how does an appraiser go about doing that?
yeah, I mean, look, so a lot of times you've got to, it can change from market to market. I mean, if there's an agent involved, what's their cost? And holding costs would include insurance for the property while you're holding it. Possibly, who knows, there could be some tax implications or things of that nature. Usually I wouldn't expect you to get that granular down in there. Do some research, kind of find out what a standard percentage is per month, right? And estimate about how long you think it'd take to do that project, and then you would incorporate that into your calculations. Um, so yeah, I mean, look, there's a little bit of research you got to do here, right? But the good thing is that normally these are market driven, and once you kind of do it and understand what your market is and what the expectations are, it's really kind of something you can apply to every single assignment, right? So it takes a little bit of time to dig into those details, but um, yeah, just do a little bit of research there. And look, I do a lot of presentations on artificial intelligence. And look, I mean, if you've played around with it at all, LLMs are a great resource. It's kind of like Google on steroids. Go in there and just treat it like you're talking to anybody, and ask some of those questions, and then also ask for it to provide data sources for its answers, so that you can then take what it's giving you and confirming it with the data sources that it references.
Bill, one last question.
Mhm.
Tom asked if we could discuss the time adjustments. Do time adjustments still apply in with non-QM transactions?
So yes, I mean, look, time adjustments. I know that it's garnered a lot of attention here over the last 3 months, based on the announcement by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and what their expectations on, supporting your market trend and putting support in for individual time adjustments. And here's my this isn't anything new, right? You've always had to provide support for your market trend, and you've always had to provide support for time adjustments. What we're seeing is that there's a new focus because of the announcement that was made by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. that there's the focus about making the market change and the time adjustments has been heightened. Um, and so, you know, you always were expected to support your market trend and always was expected to support any time adjustments, including a $0 adjustment, right? Because even a $0 adjustment is an adjustment and needs just as much support as any other adjustment. Um, so now that said, right? Because it depends. Do the non-QM lenders, are they as sensitive as our Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac selling lenders? Are they as sensitive as the those lenders? No, they're not. Right? It's kind of the expectation that you were used to over the last however many years you've been doing this, right? So again, because that announcement doesn't apply to them. They're not selling to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The reason why the lenders are so focused on it is because they're selling to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they want to make sure they meet that requirement or they could face a buyback, right? So they're very sensitive to make sure the appraiser is checking all the boxes. Non-QM lenders are not selling to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Again, they're non-qualifying, right? So their sensitivity to that isn't nearly as high. So hopefully that answers your question. Um, all right, let's see here. Have we been through this slide? I got so distracted. I don't know whether we did this slide or not. Oh, feasibility. Yeah, no, we haven't. Okay, so feasibility analysis. Look, we have one client who requires that an appraiser include a feasibility analysis. They want it to be on the very first page, right? Like the very first thing they look at. And in essence, I say I recommend it, even if you don't include it in the appraisal. Go through the feasibility analysis, and at a very minimum, keep it in your work file. So if you have any questions, you can answer them, right? But you know, in essence, does this project, because that's what it is, right? Does this project make sense for the lender and for the investor? And you know, at the foundation, we've got your as is value. It's what the property's worth today in its current condition. That gives the lender a starting point. And then you've got the renovation budget, which is a detailed cost breakdown of what it'll take to bring the property up to the proposed projected condition of the project, and which includes both the hard and the soft costs. And then layered on top of that is your as repaired value, which is the property will likely be worth once it's all done. So, and then in essence, you take a look at that and you're like, okay, well, does this make sense? Um, does it make business sense for an experienced investor, right? Um, so is the potential profit worth the risk of the time, the capital, and the market exposure? So an investor isn't going to risk $250,000 to make $10,000, right? Just doesn't really make sense. There has to be enough upside, right, for them to take on the project. I mean, much like you do as an appraiser, right? I mean, do I want to take on this assignment for X amount of dollars? And sometimes that answer is, yeah, no, that makes sense. I'll do that. And sometimes it's like, nope, it doesn't, right? It's the same thing here, right? So there needs to be a decent spread, right, for the investor for it to make sense for them to take on the projects, and again. These are general numbers. I'm not suggesting this is what it is in your market or what the number that you're supposed to plug in and play with or anything else like that. I would say 15 to 20%, is usually something that starts making it worthwhile, right? Um, and so you gotta you got that as repaired value is really key, right? And it needs to be supported with the local market and the surrounding properties. And the bottom line is, is the project grounded in sound business logic, and it's really important. So it happens regularly. We will get appraisals, and I know a lot of you probably kind of maybe shake your head at this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Where an appraiser say the as-is value is 100,000, the investor's putting in $70,000, and their as repair value is like 165, or maybe just break even at 170. Now, that could be 100% true, right? But you have to scratch your head and say, why is somebody willing to go through this project to lose $5,000, right? And remember, these are savvy borrowers, right? They've already ran their numbers in their based on what they've already done, and if they're doing it for a living, they got to be decent at it. They're like, no, I'm going to make money on this. Um, if you're coming up with that scenario, you really, really need to be able to support the fact that, look, this doesn't make sense, right? Um, and I had an appraiser, they did a very good job at that, right? A very specific example was where someone was putting in a very elaborate solar system in, I believe it was West Virginia, um, and in an area where nobody had solar, right? Um, and that was what was being done in the appraisals. Like, look, I get it. It cost every bit of that much to put that solar system in. But and it does increase the value of the property, but not nearly as high as what um, it cost to put the system in. And they had support for it, right? They did have a couple comps with solar, so they were able to demonstrate it's not there, right? And the lender, zero pushback. They were happy, right? Look, we can tell them no, we ain't we're not doing this deal, right? So definitely there are, although I would say the vast majority of the time, most of these investors, most of these borrowers, they know what they're doing, and whenever things don't, they usually have comps, right? And their comps are usually pretty decent because they've already gone through the process. Here is a quick little rundown of that. Got your as is value, your renovation costs, your after repair value, net gain, profit margin around 12%. I don't know. Is that is that enough? Is that reasonable? Right? It's on the edge, right? It's kind of on the low side. I already said 15 to 20. But I would definitely include that and say, hey, this is where the numbers lie, and I mean, go ahead and do the feasibility analysis, stick it in the report. That's totally up to you. Again, we have one client that requires it, and then we have. I would suggest you actually do it with with the other non-QM, just to make sure that you can answer the question, because it's definitely going to come, right? It's definitely going to come if you're, at or below what the cost is going to be. So, know your render's rules. Again, there's no universal handbook like the selling guides or the HUD handbook. Understand the requirements. Make sure you look at that LOE. And the way it's reported can vary from client to client. No property restrictions. Um, Many non-QM lenders avoid owner-occupied properties, like I mentioned before, or rural properties. If you're going to say that something's, owner-occupied, unless it's a purchase, right? You need to be able to support that. Some of our clients, it's so important to them, even when you indicate vacant or tenant, they want, and it'll be in the LOE. Just look at it. They want a statement how you verified that, right? So they even whenever you're saying that it's vacant or saying it's tenant, they want some type of support for that conclusion because it's so important. Um, and then ask questions, right? I mean, if you have a question, make sure you reach out. You can give us a call. We have a staff appraiser team. You can talk to them. I'm available. You can chat with me. And I guess the bottom line, these aren't boilerplate assignments. Each one is kind of a custom order. Um, the fun thing is that they're unique and they're different, and it's a challenging assignment, and that's fun. But then again, you're not as long as you provide support, right? Good, solid support for your conclusions. You're not tied to the guidelines that we're so used to seeing, right? Um, and again, this is a lot of the same thing that I've already kind of touched on. Make sure you review that engagement letter, understand the intended use and the users. Again, these are a little bit different. Confirm all documented requirements, valuation types, exhibits, what all they require. And then if there are any limitations, make sure you disclose those within the appraisal.
Bill, we had a question that came over from Tom. If the property has structural concerns, how are those addressed?
Yeah, I mean, so it's really important to point those out. Again, this is an investor. They've looked at the property. They came up with the budget, right? And they also that budget is usually reviewed. There are cases when the client may forego reviewing the budget, but that's based on their internal policy. Usually, what they'll call them a seasoned borrower, which means they've maybe already done like 20 deals with this particular borrower, right? They know they know what they're doing, right? So they don't necessarily have the budget reviewed to the scrutiny they would to someone who's new in this game. Um, if you find something that's not addressed in the budget, right? If it's a fix and flip, you find that there's something like you're like, hey, this looks like a real structural issue, and there's nothing in here that's addressing any of that. You definitely want to bring that up, in your report. I would suggest you kind of stop, give us a call. We can go to the lender and include supporting evidence, photos, or a little write up, right? And we can send it to them and say, hey, look, this isn't in the budget, this isn't addressed. How you want to move forward, and then we'll get back to you on that. But again, usually those things, right? If there's something like that, it should, if particularly, I mean, the most common one would be a fix and flip, right? That's where there's usually the most issues or problems. If you see something in the about the property that's not addressed, then you definitely want to bring that to the lender's attention. Sometimes what they do is they just say, okay, well then that needs to be make the report subject to that also being addressed. And that's usually how it goes, although it's not very common. Um, Look, fair housing, all that stuff still applies, right? The photos that you gotta make sure you don't have people in them, make sure that you're using appropriate language. Obviously, sorry about that. Hope that didn't make anybody sick. Use PAP still applies, right? Yeah, it doesn't matter. Use PAP is still required. The selling guides and the HUD handbook is separate from USPAP. Now, there's some things that they require that also USPAP requires. So there's, some crossover there, but make sure, just because it's non-QM, it 100% has to follow USPAP. So make sure you're covering that. And this is a lot of the same things. I know we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to kind of move through to the end here because I want to make sure if there's any more questions, I can at least address some of those. But the key takeaways: just make sure you read the letter of engagement. Um, if it's an ARV, look at that feasibility. Make sure you have good, strong support for your rental value. That's well supported, and understand the borrower, and the type of assignment. Stay compliant, and good, strong support for your conclusions. I can't say that enough. Again, because someone's gonna that's looking at your report's going to look at it in comparison to their business plan, and so they've already have some really good, strong support for what they think is reasonable. So, all of that said, we're down to the questions page. We got 3 minutes left. I'll stay a little longer if necessary. But Chris, do we have any?
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. I did want to touch on real quick, as the non-QM space is evolving, certain things like DSCR loans on short-term rentals is a thing, and the Fannie Mae 1007 rent schedule doesn't support short-term rentals. So Nance developed a narrative short-term rental market analysis form designed to capture that information and be able to present that to the lender so they can underwrite properly. Any comments on that, Bill, as you work through? I know a lot of non-QM lenders have approved our narrative form, and we're using that. It seems like we get multiple orders a day with those requests.
Yeah, no. So we have a NAN short-term rental analysis form. We totally recognize and 100% agree that the 1007 is not a good way to report short-term rents. And so we designed our own form that can be used for that. It only estimates the short-term rent for the property. It's very, very important that you not use those short-term rent estimates to in the valuation of the property, right? So if you are, let's say you're doing a 1025, which already includes a rent schedule, right? It already includes, an estimator of what the rent is. When you do that on the 1025, even if it's a short-term rental, that needs to be reflective of long-term rents. Why? Because you're going to take that and apply it in the income approach, right? And we're doing market value, right? So, um, if we have a short-term rental, that's completely separate. You can do the estimate of the short-term rent, and um, and but it should not be used in an income approach to value the subject. Make sure they're totally separate. Usually, if it's a DSCR or a single family rental, you're going to um, you're going to be asked to do either the NAN short-term rental analysis form or a 1007, right? Because they're going to want to know what type of income that property generates.
And where are you going to find the rental data, Bill? Just real quickly.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer depends. You know what's best in your market. Nan is working with AirDNA to and they've made some changes on to to include the data that we're requesting to complete our form. And there, very shortly, we hope to have a discount code for you that we can share so that if you decide AirDNA is a paid source, right? If you're in a market where you have a lot of those types of properties, it could be very worth your while in doing that, and you can kind of become the area expert for short-term rentals. If you're in an area where, I mean, so off the top of my head, Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge, I could see an appraiser in those areas, having a lot of opportunity to do those types of assignment. Whereas if you're, in XYZ New York, there may not be a whole lot of demand for that, and it probably wouldn't be worth your while as an appraiser to purchase that service. Um, Also, look, in your market, there's probably rental agencies that are very involved. I just went to the Outer Banks last summer, and there was a rental agency that I worked with there that owns probably hundreds, or not owns, but manages hundreds of rentals in the area. And so if you could get to know those folks really well, they would be a good data source. Sometimes you can get the information from MLS, but it really comes from all over. And it would be difficult for me to tell you what the best data source is in your market because, I mean, you're the expert there. I'm not. So.
We have a question from Sandy, who's has a question about a scenario she encountered. She said, "I just appraised," or he, I shouldn't say, assume it's a she. But Sandy, this is your question. "I just appraised a single family residence that is a new construction, and the builder's cost far exceeding my cost approach as well as the market approach. There were many items that were included in the soft costs and more profit than I would have thought should have been in the budget. I
Mhm.
used the Marshall Swift cost handbook. My appraisal was far less than the builder's budget, but I tried to explain my analysis in narrative form. The
Mhm.
market will not support the builder's cost. Any advice?"
Yeah, no, look, as long as you support, you've got the support for your, for your conclusions. And, if you're using the cost guides, Marshall and Swift or Blue Book or any of those other resources, and you're confident in those, and let's just say it's under contract, and it's under contract for much higher than that. Well, it could be in the land, right? So you got to make sure you have a good support for your land value and site improvements. But at the end of the day, and you put your comps on the grid, and if you have a really good strong support for your land value and the cost and the site improvements, and that's also supported with the comparable properties that you're utilizing that are similar. I mean, you've done what you need to do. So it just may not be it may not be worth it, which is why, hey, look, it doesn't always work out. That's why they hire us, right?
All right. Well, that's the end of our questions. So thank you everyone for your participation on the chat. I hope we got to them all, but if not, Bill is here as a resource for you as our chief appraiser. So feel free to reach out to Bill for any additional concerns, and be sure to check out our resources page on nan-amc.com. We have our past appraiser webinars available to you there. And thank everyone for joining us today. Bill, any final thoughts?
No, look, I hope you consider doing this type of work. Again, It's not only just some work that's growing here at NAN, right? We're bringing on a lot of clients and they're ordering a lot of these types of assignments. But in general, it's a growing market, right? So get really familiar with it, get very comfortable with it. Just know that, they're different, right? And that you really do need to follow that letter of engagement, make sure you totally understand it, what all the requirements, what all the expectations are. And as long as you provide really good support for your conclusions, I can see that, it'll be a really profitable um, line of business for you. So that's all I have. Thanks again for taking the time to meet with us today, and have a great week.
All right. We'll see you on the next webinar, everyone. Have a great day.